Greetings from the other side, Dokutah. In this second half of our Laterano primer, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the many terms and titles you're likely to hear when we arrive in Laterano. Now, I know that sounds relatively dry, even for me, but hear me out. It is important and practical information that will help you make sense of future reports. But if you need a little extra incentive, after we get through terminology, we'll also be talking about Laterano's rebel faction, the Pathfinders, whose leader recently traded gunshots with the Pope. The Summit of Nations, a flagellant attempt to forge diplomatic ties between all of Terra. Laterano's policies regarding the infected. And I'll sprinkle some fun facts throughout that aren't quite worth their own category. Now, while this will only be a tasting of these many topics, it's a rather large buffet, so let's get started with...
Our laws are incapable of perfectly solving every dispute. There are many situations where even the saints can't help. I must admit, I have a deep respect for people like the bishop from that monastery, considering the problems he faced. Too bad I don't have such lofty faith.
Laterano is a theocracy, a nation whose religion and government are deeply linked. Odds are there are a few common titles you're already familiar with, so let's knock the easy ones out of the way. Pope. As a theocracy, the Pope is effectively the current leader of Laterano, and interprets the will of the law. Evangelista, the 11th, is the current Pope. He's well loved and seen as a fairly progressive and kind-hearted old man, happy to indulge in the traditional pleasures of Laterano, like his favorite cactus tarts. I don't believe that the kindness or mercy he shows to be a front, but he's also stronger and more cunning than he lets on, so keep on your guard. Saint. Technically, Saint has always been a title that shares some authority with the Pope, but outside of Laterano's founding era, only popes have ever had the title. This has changed publicly with Federico, and secretly with Arturia. They were both recently granted the title by Evangelista. Rumor has it that more saints are soon to follow, as Evangelista sends those that he and the law believe might be able to steer Laterano through a, let's call it, dire prophecy. Cardinal. Like other papal systems you may know, cardinals vote to elevate one of their own to the papacy. This is a popular and important event, met with celebratory gunshots and explosives in the streets, but obviously not a calming duty. Most of the time, they assist the current pope in managing different wings of the government. You may recognize Believe as a cardinal, though they are allowed auxiliary cardinals as well to aid them, such as Lemoine. Bishops and priests are preachers of the faith, with the former often being given authority over specific territories. In a theocracy like Laterano, they would be similar to governors or mayors. Bishop Torregrossa will serve as a prime example. Now, let's move on to some of the more obscure titles.
The notarial hall employs more than just field executors. There's plenty of civil service posts.
Curia. If you hear this term, you can shortcut it in your head to the government. While the Pope is the leader of Laterano, modern nations cannot be managed by a single man. The Curia, overseen by the cardinals, is the umbrella under which most day-to-day government is handled. Tribunal. You've likely heard the term refer to judicial matters, as in military tribunals, but in Laterano, a tribunal is simply a numbered branch of government under the Curia. There are 7 branches in total, so you're likely to hear this term quite a bit in different contexts. The first tribunal, primus, is the judicial branch. The second, secundus, are mediators between branches. The third, tertius, manage major industries like agriculture, transport, and the like. The fourth, quartus, manage logistics and the economy. You can likely imagine that the second tribunal likely has to help the fourth and the third coordinate quite a bit. The fifth, quintus, manages law enforcement, firefighting, public security, and notarization. That is to say, the witnessing of contracts. This is an important one for you to keep in mind, Dokutah. The notarial hall is part of the 5th tribunal, and many of our operators, such as executor, have ties to it. The 6th, sextus, manages public welfare and education. Civil servants and those who try to better the quality of life in Laterano can be found here. A member of note is operator spuria. Finally, the 7th, septimus, manages intelligence gathering, foreign affairs, and national defense. Lemoine is a prominent member, as is Oring. I don't expect you to remember that offhand, so I'll give you this as well. A good rule of thumb as you encounter people from this or that tribunal is to note that the farther down the list, the more the gaze of that tribunal wanders from the very heart of Laterano until it finally glimpses past its own borders. Moving on, Notarial Hall. As mentioned, it is a division under the 5th Tribunal. They have authority over ensuring the 13 rights of citizenship, the retrieval of patron firearms, as well as day-to-day matters like taxation and contract enforcement. Thinking of them as a police force would be a helpful mental shortcut. Executor. It's Federico's code name, as well as a title he shares with other members of the Notarial Hall. Executors are on occasion empowered to both cross borders and use force to perform their roles. Note that this permission for force would not exempt them from a fall if they were to shoot and kill a fellow Sancta. Given Federico's willingness to pull the trigger, I could see why you'd think that, however. I certainly wondered that myself for quite a time. Legati. Under the 7th Tribunal, the Legati, singular legatus, are envoys that travel around Terra to relieve tensions and perform peacekeeping duties. The organization is also referred to as the singular legatus. I know, just bear with it. Nuntii Apostolici, or Apostolic Envoy, is another title you're likely to hear, often shortened to the singular Nuncio. They're managed by the 7th Tribunal, and Oring is likely the face that comes to mind for this role. A quick side note here, the Legatus were founded rather recently, about 30 or so years ago, as increasingly devastating global conflicts has shown Laterano the potential danger of ignoring the world outside its borders.
To most Lateranos, heavy armor doesn't serve much of a purpose. Of course, when we perform the large-scale rituals of our homeland, we do dress up in ceremonial garb.
Pontifica Cohors Lateran. My Lattering is a bit rusty, if my pronunciation hasn't been enough of a hint so far, but I'd translate it roughly as the Pope's Army of Laterano. They form the bulk of Laterano's military, which you likely associate with Plume, despite her being a former member. The reason for her departure is a touchy subject, but she still holds a great amount of self-identity and pride in her formal life. Apostolic Knights. You've likely heard of them referred to as the Gun Knights as well. They are Laterano's elites in terms of raw destructive power, though their most common role is of the Pope's personal guard. They're among the rare Sancta to frequently wear helmets, along with the rest of their impressive armor. Let me explain that. Among Sancta, wearing a hat can be seen as a bit strange, perhaps even hinting at a particularly battle-tested Sancta. This is because a Sancta's halo causes a strong feeling of discomfort if their heads are covered. Training to wear a helmet is one of the most common cases. You'll see a Sancta willingly put up with that. Oh, and another thing. If you see an Apostolic Knight, you can rest assured they're Sancta, as no other race has ever joined their ranks. Fiumetta, a Liberi raised by a Gun Knight, was intended to be the first non-Sancta to join them, and a seat is still available to her. The idea of her joining is relatively non-controversial among the Gun Knights, as far as we know. However, due to unrelated incidents, she is, by her own choosing, currently on a different path.
Bullets may be fast, but they aren't always so quick to solve disputes.
A world war known as the Battle of the Four Emperors ripped Terra apart once. After this, Laterano created the Legatus institution, sending diplomats all across the world. And on the 30th anniversary, this philosophy has expanded into the Summit of Nations. The summit is envisioned as a regularly held meeting between leaders from across Terra to conduct diplomacy, with Laterano as neutral ground. Currently, interest from the other nations has been light, with envoys mostly being on the lower level of power. As drenched as this is in politics and history, I'm more fascinated by the cultural shift here. Laterano has always been an isolated paradise, but that isolationism has crumbled year by year. If Laterano does not change with the times, whether invited or not, war will come to their doorstep after all. Laterano has yet to decide how it will change, but whatever choice they make, our preconceptions of the Sancta may be outdated soon. For myself, I do hope the summit succeeds, but I suppose that goes without saying. And you might notice the irony of this initiative being rather similar to the hopes she had with Babel. We don't have time to get into it, but I didn't want to leave the work the Sarkas have done with the same goal unmentioned. Especially since there has been recent evidence to suggest that the seeds of this initiative may have been planted when the Pope and Teresa, king of the Sarkas, had come into direct contact. At the time of the military commission's creation, Teresa's journals mention her speaking to a traveling Sancta messenger. During this time, Pope Evangelista's title and role was that of a messenger, and Kazdal is among the places he has spoken of visiting. It really does feel like she's entrusted her vision to as many souls as she could reach in her time, doesn't it, Dokutah? Sorry, I know a lot of this information is still raw for you. When you're ready, we can talk more about your past. But for now, why don't we lighten the mood and talk about a potential civil war in Laterano instead?
Can people really cut everything loose without looking back? Even shatter the order that was there? All to chase ideals? That's a dedication that I can comprehend, but can't identify with. I know you all have your own beliefs at Rhodes Island, too. Here's hoping we don't come into direct conflict one day, Doctor.
Even Laterano, with its law and empathy, is not without dissent. The most well-known symbol of this are the Pathfinders, a laddering sect that accepts all races, including the Sarkas. The official, derisive term for them by the Church is the Astray, which, if you still recall, just so happens to be an acceptable translation of Erari. Now, each member has their own personal beliefs, reasons for this schism, including Patia's distaste for the Sancta worship common among Liberi. And yes, I acknowledge my current catalog of reports hasn't really helped the stereotype. However, the Pathfinder's main goal is the end to Laterano's policy of isolationism, to use its influence to impact the world around them, rather than to maintain the status quo or reinforce its own borders. The current Pope finds some common ground with them here. To go deeper into them or their leader, the Sancta Andoing, also known as the Martyr or the Guide, would take more time than we have, but a report on Fiammetta or Mostima would certainly have quite a bit to say on the topic.
May the Lord bless you, Doctor.
Obviously, the matter of the infected will always be worth its own section on any culture we discuss, Dokutah. Laterano's policy on infection is, quite simply, exile. The infected are not allowed in paradise, though there are some very rare exceptions. After all, even falling does not necessarily come with the same blanket expulsion. Cultural views on the infected are hard to gauge. The latterings Andraran employ are obviously outliers, and as a cultural tendency, grim matters are often just not discussed at all in Laterano. I don't need to tell you that their policy falls short of Rhodes' vision, but to Laterano's credit, infected citizens still retain their rights as citizens, except of course for the ability to remain in lattering territory. If a lattering is infected, executors like Insider might even be assigned to help infected like Areng get their footing on the outside. Things could be worse, as they say, but, well, they could also be a lot better. Aid or not, exile is a difficult thing that even the healthy would struggle with, especially in Terra. In terms of becoming infected, it seems that the most likely vector is the Originium related to Firearms. I'd like to tell you what the precautionary measures are like, but detailed records on Laterano's firearm technology are incredibly hard to come by. Still, given how especially tight the bureaucracy on guns is, I imagine their precautionary measures are top-notch. So at the very least, infection is likely rather rare in Laterano.
I'm lucky I was born a Lateran. No, Doctor, our good fortune does not lie in our halos, but in our material abundance and strong state. You have an ideal Rhodes Island of your own? It's not easy chasing your dreams, but good luck, I guess.